My son and his wife left me to rot in a hospital over a $10,000 bill, never realizing I secretly had $5 million in asset. They thought they'd won. But the way I took revenge is something you would never believe. Before continue, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. That's free and only way to support us. Thank you. The first thing I noticed was the sound. A slow beep like a lazy woodpecker tapping a hollow tree. The second was the light. Flat and white and a little cruel, as if it had forgotten people had skin and eyes and feelings. The third was the paper on my chest, heavy in a way paper is not supposed to be. 10,000. The number sat there like a brick. Not a mountain-sized debt. Not a lifetime of dues. Just a brick. Hard enough to hurt, small enough to throw. I looked at the ceiling tiles and tried to count the tiny dots. The nurse had told me to relax. She said I would be fine. She said the surgery went well. She said the doctor would be back soon. She said a lot of things that sounded like a bus schedule. Useful to some people, not to me. My mind was not on healing. My mind was on footsteps that had faded too fast. My son and his wife had left. That was the whole story packed inside a single sentence. They did not slam doors. They did not raise voices. They did not cry. They simply carried their silence out of my room, past the water jug, past the hand sanitizer, past the smiling poster that said kindness was a cure. I watched their shoulders disappear down the hall and felt something in me sink in a quiet way, like a boat at low tide. The paper on my chest kept staring back. 10,000. People spend that on a long weekend if they plan it badly. People lose that in stocks when they chase a tip. People drop that on kitchens to get a shinier sink. It was not a fortune. It was not a life sentence. But to them, in that moment, it was a reason. A reason to walk away from the person who taught a small boy how to tie laces, who held a bicycle seat steady while the same boy wobbled toward balance, who stood in bad weather so that boy could stand in doors that opened easily. I breathed in the hospital air and tasted lemon and loneliness. A tea trolley rattled by. Somewhere a child laughed. Somewhere a man groaned. My body felt old and my heart felt older. I tried to be practical. I told myself they were stressed. I told myself they were scared. I told myself people make mistakes when they see numbers and worry about bills and futures and spreadsheet. The words made sense in my head, but they did not heal the bruise. The bruise had a shape, and that shape was the outline of two people I loved. A small part of me found a way to be funny about it. Life had just given me a test and a receipt on the same day. The test I passed, thanks to the surgeon. The receipt, apparently I failed. Somewhere in another universe, there was a version of me who joked about it and moved on. In this universe, I lay still and tasted the metal edge of anger. They did not know what I had built. They did not know about the years wrapped inside old folders in my study. Property deeds with coffee stains. Statements with numbers that grew from little sprouts into tall trees. A quiet forest worth $5 million, hidden behind ordinary walls and ordinary clothes. I had kept it quiet because pride is best served plain. I did not want people to clap for me. I wanted to clap for myself when no one was watching. I also wanted my son to be his own oak, not a vine around my trunk. The irony was almost comic. If they had asked, I could have paid for the whole ward and sent everyone home with fruit baskets. Instead, I lay there, a little sore and a lot awake, wearing a gown that made me look like a thin curtain. I could feel the money like a second heartbeat, patient and private. I could also feel a new thought forming, sharp and calm at the same time. The thought did not shout. It did not kick chairs. It just cleared its throat and took a seat. A young nurse came in and adjusted my fore. She had gentle hands and an efficient mind. She told me I was doing well. She told me to rest. She asked if I needed anything. I needed many things she could not bring. I needed time to rewind. I needed a son who remembered the taste of simple soup on a rainy day, the sound of shoes being dried near a heater, the warmth of a father's palm on a fevered forehead. I nodded anyway and asked for water, because water is the one honest thing in a place built on waiting. When she left, I closed my eyes and walked through old rooms in my head. A small kitchen with a wobbly table. A box fan that made summer a little less mean. A boy with a school bag too big for his back. I worked 2 jobs back then. One paid in money. The other paid in hope. I never sent a bill for hope. I never kept a ledger for love. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe I should have stapled a receipt to every sacrifice so he could add them up later and see that the total was priceless. The monitor kept beeping. The room kept breathing. The paper on my chest kept sitting there like a dare. I picked it up and folded it in half, then in half again, until it became a small square that felt like a seed. I slipped it under my pillow. I told myself I would not cry. I told myself I would not beg. I told myself I would get up and walk out of this place with my spine as straight as a ruler. I told myself many things. One of them was new. I decided that money would not be a chain anymore. It would be a key to a door they would not see coming. A door that opened to something larger than family dinners and holiday photos and forced smiles. A door that opened to a lesson, the kind that cannot be forgotten. I lay there, and for the first time that day I felt stronger than the number on the page. The bill was a brick. I had a whole house. And somewhere under the weight of bright lights and thin blankets, the foundation of my revenge set like concrete. The hospital smell clung to me even after I was discharged. That strange mix of bleach, medicine, and boiled vegetables stayed in my nose as if to remind me of what had happened. Every time I inhaled, I could almost see their faces again, my son's stiff jaw, his wife's tight purse of lips. They weren't cruel in the way villains are cruel in movies. No. Their cruelty was quiet. Calculated. Dressed in polite excuses and quick exit. I sat in my old living room a week later, the TV murmuring in the background. I wasn't watching. My eyes were fixed on the old photo frame perched on the shelf. A picture of me and my son when he was barely 7. He had a missing tooth and held onto my hand like it was the only anchor in the world. Back then, he used to call me a giant. Said I was stronger than the superheroes he watched on Saturday mornings. Strange how giants can shrink into burdens over time. Memories started crashing into me like waves that didn't stop coming. Nights when I skipped dinner so he could eat the last egg. Mornings when I woke up at 4 just to get a few extra hours at the factory. The calluses on my palms weren't medals, they were my silent way of saying, "You'll never go hungry." Every laugh of his was worth it, every ache in my bones. And when he grew older, it wasn't just food and clothes. It was tuition fees. It was summer camp. It was a new bike when his old one got stolen, even though it meant I walked to work for 2 months. I gave without keeping count, like a fool with an endless wallet. But fools learn, and my lesson came with a price tag of 10,000. What stung more wasn't the number. It was the choice. They chose to leave me. Not because they couldn't pay, but because they didn't want to. His wife's influence hung over him like smoke in a closed room. She always had that sharp look in her eyes whenever money was discussed, like a hawk measuring what was worth catching and what wasn't. To her, I wasn't worth catching. Just another bill. Just another line item. Sometimes I laughed to myself. A bitter kind of laugh that tasted like iron. Imagine that, the man who once carried his son through fevers, now discarded like a grocery bag with a hole in it. The irony was delicious in its cruelty. But the more I thought about it, the more my anger began to change shape. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was fuel. Every memory of sacrifice became another log on the fire burning inside me. Every night I stayed up mending shoes, every coin I saved in secret jars, every holiday I worked instead of rested, all of it suddenly meant something new. It wasn't just the story of a father's sacrifice. It was the foundation of something bigger. Something they would never see coming. I walked into my bedroom that night and opened the drawer of my old wooden desk. Inside were some faded notebooks where I used to jot down numbers, savings, and dreams I didn't tell anyone about. My handwriting was shaky, messy, sometimes smudged by tired hands, but the numbers spoke clearly. They whispered about land deeds, stocks, and investments that had blossomed quietly while everyone thought I was just another working man with too many wrinkles and too little left in his pockets. 5 million. That number hummed like a secret melody only I could hear. It was mine, hard-earned, untouched, waiting. And in that quiet room, surrounded by dusty papers and memories that still stung, I realized something important. They thought they had walked out of my life for 10,000. What they had really done was lock themselves out of 5 million. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling fan creaking above me. For years, I had imagined my money passing down to my son, helping him, helping his children, building a future for a family I thought valued me. But now, I felt strangely free. That chain of obligation had snapped in the cold light of betrayal. I wasn't going to beg for his love anymore. I wasn't going to buy his respect. If he saw me as nothing more than a bill, then he would get nothing more than silence. But silence wasn't enough. I wanted them to feel something. Not pain for the sake of pain. No. Something deeper. I wanted them to feel the emptiness I felt when they walked away. I wanted them to realize too late what they had thrown away. That was when the idea of revenge first began to breathe inside me. It was faint at first, like the spark at the end of a dying match. But sparks, when fed, can burn forests down. I went into the study at noon when the sun made the dust look like tiny stars. The chair creaked the way it always had, old wood talking to old bones. I pulled the bottom drawer open and there it was, the quiet history of my life. Folders with my name printed again and again. Receipts with coffee rings. Notes in the margin where tired hands had tried to stay neat and failed. Numbers that once felt small now stacked like bricks into a strong wall. Land deeds lay in a neat pile, edges worn smooth from years of being taken out and put back. A folder of stocks and bonds smiled in its own stiff, paper way. Another envelope held a list of rents and interest payments I had tracked like a hobby. None of it flashy. No gold lines. No big stamp. Just honest records of long days and stubborn saving. 5 million spread out on a desk that had seen more winters than some marriages. I ran a finger down a page and felt a strange mix of pride and sadness. Pride for the life I built with the kind of patience that never wins applause. Sadness for the boy who once thought I was a giant and now treated me like a bill with a heartbeat. I had kept this secret for many reasons. I wanted him to grow his own root. I wanted to know the world still had surprises. I also wanted to protect myself from the kind of hunger that arrives with a smile and leaves with a house key. Little signs had been there for years. A fancy stroller that looked like a race car. A kitchen remodel that changed nothing but the color of the cupboard. Vacations that were really photo shoots with beaches in the background. I had paid for none of it and said less than I wanted to say. I kept my head down and my money quiet. I told myself love needed room to breathe. Maybe love also needed a lock on the drawer. I found an old will tucked inside a manila envelope, the paper a little yellow at the edges. It was simple and kind, the way I felt back then. A list of things that would pass to my son and, by extension, to the woman who could walk out of a hospital without looking back. I read it twice. It felt like a shirt that no longer fit. Not because I had grown bigger, but because my shape had changed. I set the will aside and took out a clean sheet. The room felt cooler. The fan stuttered above me like it was cheering. My plan did not arrive with thunder. It came in steps, steady and clean. I would call a lawyer I trusted. I would set up a trust that did not bend to tears or holidays. I would give my money the job it wanted all along. It would lift people who had no hand to hold at billing counters. It would pay for hospital beds so no one lay awake counting zeros. It would build a scholarship for kids who carry lunch in plastic bags and dreams in old shoes. It would feed a kitchen that never asks questions when someone says they are hungry. It would leave a little for the nurses who adjust 4 lines with soft hands and firm hearts. Revenge bubbled under all of that like a hidden spring. Not the loud kind with broken plates and big scenes. A quiet kind. The kind that uses silence like a mirror. They had drawn a line through me over 10,000. I would draw a line through their plans with 5 million. Not to starve them. To wake them. To show them what money is and what it is not. To make them stand in the empty space where care should be and feel the draft. I pictured the hospital corridor again. The lemon smell. The poster about kindness. I decided to pay that bill myself, in cash, not for them but for me. Then I would add a donation under a simple name to cover a few more beds for people who come in scared and leave a little less scared. No plaque. No photo. Just fewer bricks on more chests. A small laugh escaped me when I realized I felt lighter. 10,000 had been a weight on my heart. 5 million had become a weight in my hand, and now I knew where to place it. Not in the pockets of people who saw me as a number, but in the lives of people who needed a hand. I imagined telling my lawyer to write conditions that read like weather. Clear. Unchanging. No special letters from sons who remember birthdays only when there is cake. No sudden rewrites when a voice turns sweet at tax time. The trust would be a door that opens one way. I closed the drawer and looked around the room. The old clock ticked with the same lazy rhythm, but it no longer annoyed me. Time had been my partner all along, not my enemy. It had watched me lift sacks, count coins, skip dinners, and sign papers. It had also watched me lie in a bed while a number sat on my chest. Now it would watch me choose what kind of old man I would be. I made tea on the stove the slow way, letting the steam fog the window. The street outside was the same, with a stray cat acting like a landlord and a boy kicking a ball against a wall. I felt steady. Not happy, not yet, but steady. I was not the wounded father in a hospital gown anymore. I was the man who had a map. It had sharp turns and one final destination. It also had a detour called mercy. That night I slept without the twitchy dreams. The new will lived in my head like a song I knew by heart. In the morning, I would call the bank, the lawyer, the hospital. I would start the small machines that moved big things. And somewhere between the first phone call and the last signature, the revenge I wanted would grow teeth, while the kindness I needed would grow wings. Morning arrived like an old friend with no sense of timing. The sun slipped in through the curtains, too bright for the weight in my chest. I sat with my tea, staring at the steam as if it had answers. It didn't, but I did. The drawer had already told me what had to be done. Now it was time to let the world hear it. I dialed the number of an old lawyer I knew, the kind of man who wore the same suit for 30 years and never forgot a comma. His voice crackled through the line, steady, polite, as if he'd been waiting for me all this time. I told him I needed to meet. I didn't explain. Some things don't need explanations. Silence has a way of making the other person curious enough to hurry. By noon, I was sitting in his office. The place smelled of paper and leather chairs that had seen too many tired men like me. Certificates lined the walls, each one framed, each one yellowing at the edges. His desk was neat, a battlefield where pens and files stood at attention. He adjusted his glasses and looked at me, not like a client, but like a man who'd come to settle scores with life itself. I handed him the old will. He read it quietly, his lips pressing into a thin line. When he looked up, he didn't ask why. He just asked how. How did I want the story to end? That's when I told him. Everything. The hospital. The 10,000. The footsteps fading down the corridor. The 5 million waiting in silence. And the revenge that wasn't just revenge, it was a lesson, wrapped in paper and sealed with my signature. I told him I wanted a new will. One that left nothing to the son who weighed me like a bill. Nothing to the wife who treated me like a receipt. Instead, it would go to people who never knew my name, but would feel my hand when they needed it most. Charities, scholarships, hospitals, kitchens. Places where money didn't rot in handbags or glimmer in photos, but breathed life into broken hearts. The lawyer nodded slowly, the way trees nod in heavy wind. He didn't judge. He didn't argue. He just started writing. His pen scratched across the page like it was carving my anger into law. I watched every line form, every condition set, and with each stroke, I felt lighter. When he finished, he pushed the papers toward me. The air between us was thick, as if the ink itself carried weight. I picked up the pen. For a moment, my hand shook. Not from weakness, but from the gravity of it. This was more than a will. This was a statement. A verdict. A final chapter written in advance. I signed. The letters of my name sprawled across the page like a scar. A scar that would not fade, no matter how many tears my son's wife might cry later, no matter how many excuses my son might craft. The ink dried fast. Revenge, it seemed, did not like to wait. The lawyer cleared his throat and said he would file it right away. I nodded, but my mind was far from the office. It was back in that hospital room, where I had lain small and broken under bright lights. Back to the moment when they left, and I realized love had been traded for numbers. That moment had cut me open. This moment had stitched me shut. Walking out of his office, the city felt different. Cars honked, vendors shouted, people rushed, but all of it seemed lighter, almost amusing. I passed a man arguing with a shopkeeper over change. 10,000 had ended my place in my son's heart. Here, two men were ready to fight over a few dollars. Money had always been a trickster, but now I had turned it into my weapon. At home, I poured myself another cup of tea. The bitterness of the leaves matched the taste of my thoughts. I imagined the day when my son would stand before a lawyer, expecting papers to hand him keys and titles. Instead, he'd get silence. He'd get the truth that while he walked away from me, I walked away from him forever. But deep inside, it wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about freedom. Freedom from the chains of expectation. Freedom from the idea that love had to be blind. I had opened my eyes, and I would never close them again. That night, I slept better. Not the restless sleep of the hospital. Not the bitter dozing of the days after. But the kind of sleep that comes when a plan is set, when the future has been rewritten, when the lawyer's pen has turned betrayal into something sharper than a knife. And for the first time in years, I didn't dream of my son. I dreamed of strangers smiling, hospitals funded, children learning, kitchens filled. My money had finally found its family. Morning felt clean, like someone had wiped my life with a damp cloth and left the sun to finish the job. I made tea and started with the hospital. Numbers first, emotions later. The billing office smelled like printer ink and mild panic. I watched a clerk scroll through my file while I stood still and breathed slow. 10,000 had once sat on my chest like a brick. Now it looked small on a screen, a little square inside a larger maze. I paid it without flinching. The card slid, the receipt printed, the clerk smiled the tired smile of someone who lives between other people's fears. Before I left, I walked down the corridor to the donations desk. The sign was simple. No golden letters. No velvet ropes. I gave a sum that would make the ward feel lighter for a good while. Beds, medicine, transport for families who count bus stops like coins. I kept my name quiet. I asked for nothing named after me. Not a wing. Not a plaque. Not a bench. Let the help do its job without wearing my face. As I turned to go, I passed the room I had stayed in. The sheets were new, the same tough white. A different patient lay there, a man with tired eyes, and a woman holding his hand the way hands are supposed to be held. I felt a pinch in my chest and then a small peace. Not everyone walks away. Some people anchor each other even when the ocean is cruel. Back home, I spread folders across the table like a map of a country I owned but never bragged about. The lawyer had sent drafts already. Trusts with clean rules. Conditions like Iron Gate. Money that would move on a schedule no tantrum could shake. I read every line twice. I imagined that future like a house with many doors where strangers could find a warm room and a light always on. I kept a small notebook for the plan. I wrote down the places my money would travel. The free clinic near the bus depot with peeling paint and a doctor who never learned how to look bored. The kitchen where steam rose from big pots and no one asked why someone needed a second serving. A scholarship for kids who did homework under streetlights and still smiled like they had discovered a secret. I added a quiet fund for nurses who work nights and walk home when the city yawns and forgets them. The list looked like a grocery run for hope. In the afternoon, my phone blinked with a message from my son. Not words that carried softness. Words clipped short like the ends of nails. He asked if I was recovering, then slid toward a question about the bill, then wandered near the topic of expenses in a way that pretended to be casual. I felt nothing rise in me. Not anger. Not longing. Just a cool lake where a storm had once raged. I replied with the basics. I said I was fine. I said the bill was settled. I did not ask him to visit. I did not invite a new wound. The evening brought a different kind of visitor. A neighbor who had known me since I could carry cement sacks without groaning. He brought soup that tasted like actual food and not a lab experiment. He did not ask for details. He talked about the cat that thinks my fence is a suggestion and the boy who keeps kicking a ball against the wall until the wall might decide to kick back. We laughed the way old men laugh when the air is clean. When he left, he said the street is quieter when I am out walking and that I should come back to it soon. Small kindness, big weight. Later I cleaned my study. I emptied drawers of paper clips that had married each other in secret. I stacked the folders in a new order. The old will went into a plain envelope marked with a single word that belonged to the past. The new documents sat in the middle, calm and exact. I slipped copies into a fireproof box that had never had a purpose until now. The click of the latch sounded like the closing of an old chapter. Night settled soft. I brewed tea again, held the cup like it was a small sun. The window showed me a neighbor's neon sign flickering on and off with the stubbornness of old electricity. I thought about timing. Revenge likes drama, but I wanted precision. I would not storm their door. I would not stage a scene. The lesson would be a shadow that follows them until they turn and notice it has no face they can bargain with. I allowed myself one memory of my son as a little boy. A rainstorm had trapped us under a broken shop awning. He had put his hand inside mine without looking, the easy trust of a child who believes a father is a wall against all weather. I stood inside that memory for a moment, then stepped out gently, as if leaving a room where someone still sleeps. The plan needed one more piece. I decided to visit them, not to beg or scold, but to watch. People reveal themselves when they think they have already won. I would bring a small gift, something plain, something that could never be read as a bribe. I would sit in their tidy living room with its cushions that never sag and listen to their words and the spaces between them. I would measure their house the way carpenters measure wood. Straight lines, clean cuts, no illusions. Before bed, I wrote a final line in the notebook. The line said that money is a mirror. It shows people their faces, not the ones they pose for the world, the real ones. Tomorrow, I would hold up that mirror and keep my own face steady. If I saw regret, I would store it like a photograph. If I saw greed, I would file it under proof. Either way, the trust would stand, the donations would move, and the road ahead would not need their footprints. I turned off the light and lay down. The house hummed its old tune. My heart kept time with it, steady now. Somewhere, in a hospital room I had already left, a monitor beeped for someone else. Somewhere, a kitchen ladled soup into bowls. Somewhere, a nurse checked a chart and smiled to herself because a number had turned kinder. The first receipts were already echoing. The reverberations would come. I stood at their doorstep with nothing but a jar of honey. Not expensive honey, not the kind wrapped in gold foil and imported labels. Just a jar from the local market, thick and amber, the kind old folks say heals a cough and sweetens a bitter day. A simple gift, something no one could twist into meaning more than it was. The door opened and my son stood there. His face wore the kind of smile people practice in mirrors before job interviews. It didn't reach his eyes. Behind him, I could hear the hum of a television, laughter from a sitcom where problems always resolve in 22 minutes. His wife appeared at his shoulder, her eyes sharp as ever, scanning me like I was an unexpected bill delivered to their doorstep. They invited me in. Not warmly, not coldly. Just in. The living room looked like a furniture store catalog, cushions too neat, photos staged, candles that had never been lit. I placed the jar on the table, the glass catching the light. They thanked me with voices that sounded like receipts being crumpled. We sat. The silence grew first. Then came the small talk. My son asked about my health, as if reading off a script. His wife nodded at all the right pauses but never let go of that glance, the one that always made me feel like an item being returned. I answered simply. Yes, I was healing. Yes, I was eating. No, I wasn't working too hard. I didn't mention the lawyer. I didn't mention the trust. I didn't mention the 5 million quietly waiting for a better story. They shifted. My son cleared his throat. He asked about the hospital bill. Casual, as if he were asking about the weather. I said it was settled. His wife's eyebrows lifted slightly, like a cat catching a sound in the grass. She leaned in a little too quickly, asking how, if insurance had refused. Her voice was dipped in concern but carried the weight of suspicion. I smiled. The kind of smile that says both everything and nothing. I told her not to worry. She pressed again, lightly, circling the topic like a vulture circling air current. I kept my answer short. Yes, it was handled. No, I didn't need their help. Their relief was too quick, too visible, and in that moment I knew they weren't worried about me. They were worried about what might fall into their lap. Or worse, what might not. I let the silence work. Silence is stronger than words when you use it right. My son shifted again, fiddling with his watch. He asked if I needed anything. A ride. Groceries. Assistance. All offers that sounded like lines rehearsed in case someone was listening. I told him no, thank you. His shoulders sagged in quiet relief, like a man who had just been told his debt was cancelled. His wife steered the talk to their lives. A new car. A possible vacation. Renovations they were considering. They spoke with bright voices, painting pictures of a future lined with things. I nodded, sipped the tea she placed in front of me, and thought of how small their dreams looked compared to the mountain they had already abandoned. The jar of honey sat between us the whole time, glowing in the light, ignored, almost mocking. A sweet thing in a room full of bitterness. When I stood to leave, my son walked me to the door. He patted my back awkwardly, the way strangers do when they don't know if they're allowed to hug. His wife lingered in the background, her eyes still searching me, still hungry for answers I wasn't going to give. On the walk home, the air felt lighter. I realized I hadn't gone there to test them. I had gone there to confirm what I already knew. They hadn't changed. Not even close. Their world was still measured in dollars and desires. Love, for them, was a balance sheet. Affection, a transaction. And I decided right there that when the day came, when the lawyer called them into his office, I would not be present. No dramatic reveal, no speech, no lecture. Just silence, followed by the sound of paper being unfolded. They would read, and they would understand. Too late. The street lights flickered on as I reached my house. I set the empty tea cup down on the counter, washed my hands, and looked out the window at the stray cat curling on my porch. It stretched, yawned, and settled without asking permission. That cat had shown me more loyalty than the people who shared my blood. I smiled for real this time. My revenge wasn't about shouting, wasn't about slamming doors. It was about letting silence and paper do the work. About letting money flow where love was still alive. About leaving them with nothing but the echo of their own choices. The jar of honey remained in their house. Sweetness they didn't earn. A reminder, perhaps, that sometimes gifts come without price tags, and sometimes they don't come at all. Days stretched into weeks, and silence became my sharpest weapon. I didn't call them. I didn't visit again. I didn't ask about their lives, their plans, their endless shopping lists. I simply existed on the edges of their world, quiet as a shadow. And shadows, I learned, can haunt better than voices. At first, they seemed relieved. No sudden requests. No awkward bills. No uncomfortable reminders that I was still alive. But silence is a strange thing. It begins as a comfort and ends as a question. I knew, sooner or later, they would wonder. I busied myself with things they didn't know about. Meetings with the lawyer. Papers signed, sealed, and tucked away like secrets waiting for the right hour to strike. Visits to the hospital donation office where new beds were being arranged, all paid for by the pockets they thought were empty. Small scholarships set up for children who didn't even know my name, children who would someday carry books instead of burdens. Every signature I placed felt like tightening a knot on the rope of my revenge. Sometimes I laughed to myself in the quiet of my kitchen. A soft, bitter laugh that no one else could hear. My son once believed I had nothing. His wife treated me like a relic of the past, a piece of furniture too heavy to move but too ugly to keep. And yet here I was, moving pieces across a board they didn't even know existed. Their silence came next. My phone stayed still for weeks. No calls, no texts. Perhaps they thought I was sulking, waiting to be begged back into their lives. Perhaps they hoped ignoring me would make me crawl. Instead, I let the silence stretch like a rope tightening between us. But silence has another side. It gives you time to think, and thinking brings memories. Late at night, when the house creaked and the street outside lay quiet, the memories returned. Him as a boy, asleep in the back seat of the car after a long day at the fair. Him running to me with a scraped knee, tears turning into laughter when I carried him on my shoulders. Him graduating, shaking my hand with pride, before his wife's shadow fell over us and dimmed everything. The ache was there. I won't lie. Revenge is not an eraser. It doesn't wipe out love. It just hardens it, reshapes it, makes it something colder. I still loved the boy he once was. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man who counted his worth in bills and balances. One afternoon, the phone rang. His name flashed on the screen. I let it ring twice before I answered, my voice calm, steady, almost too steady. He asked how I was. I said fine. He hesitated, then mentioned they were thinking of buying a second car. His voice stumbled at the edges, as if fishing for something. Approval? Support? A hint of money waiting? I gave none. Just silence broken by short answers. Yes, I was fine. Yes, the weather was warm. No, I didn't need anything. He tried again, circling closer. Did I have enough saved up for emergencies? Was I managing bills on my own? His voice carried the weight of curiosity, but not concern. I told him simply, I'm comfortable. Nothing more. Nothing less. The silence that followed was thick enough to chew. He didn't push further. He ended the call with forced warmth. I hung up with a smile, because I knew what was gnawing at him. Not love. Not guilt. Curiosity. The most dangerous hunger of all. That night, I wrote in my notebook again. A single line: silence is louder than anger. The next week, I went back to the lawyer's office. We finalized the last details. Everything was in place now. The trust was airtight. The donations already flowing. The trap ready. All that was left was time. And time, unlike people, never betrays. I walked out of the office into the bright afternoon, the city buzzing around me. I passed families laughing, couples arguing, children chasing after kites. Life carried on, messy and loud. But in my chest, silence sat like a throne. They thought I was weak. They thought I was poor. They thought they had measured me and found me lacking. Soon, they would learn the truth. Not from my lips, but from the quiet cruelty of paper, ink, and signatures. Revenge was no longer just a plan. It was a presence, walking beside me everywhere I went. Silence did its quiet work. I did mine. Days fell off the calendar like dry leaves, and for the first time in a long time, I felt in control of my own story. The trust moved like a river under ice, steady and unseen. The hospital sent an update about new beds installed in the ward. The kitchen sent a short note that the evening line had grown, then shrunk, then grown again, as if hunger breathed. The scholarship committee mailed a list with names that sounded like bright mornings. All of it warmed the rooms of my house better than any heater. Out on the street, life kept bumping into itself. The neighbor's cat continued its illegal stay on my porch and paid rent in yawns. The boy with the stubborn football had learned a new trick, and now the wall suffered with style. I walked again, slow loops around the block, letting my joints complain like old men at a tea shop. Every lap felt like a stitch pulling me shut. The first crack in their glass reached me through a sideways route. A friend of a friend mentioned seeing my son at a bank, voice lowered, posture stiff, the way people look when pride and panic argue behind the face. Nothing solid, just the smell of smoke where no one could see fire. A day later, another whisper drifted in. The fancy car had gone back to the showroom, not as a test drive this time, but as a goodbye with paperwork attached. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I made tea and let the steam carry away any temptation to dance. Their call came on a Thursday afternoon that felt like cotton. My son's voice carried tiny dents. He asked about my health, spoke about their busy week, then slid toward the shallow end of questions. He tried to sound casual about a small loan for a short gap, nothing dramatic, barely an inconvenience, the kind of thing families do when tides misbehave. I listened with the same calm I used at the lawyer's desk. I told him I had my own plans in motion and kept the door closed without slamming it. He paused in a way that said the script had not prepared him for that line. He ended the call gently, but I could hear the grind of gears not catching. Silence returned and did another round of cleaning. Then the next crack showed. I saw them by accident at a store that sells everything and nothing. She stood in an aisle comparing 3 versions of the same shiny thing. He checked his phone more than the price tags. Their faces looked fine if a person liked masks. But masks slip at the corners. The smile she wore had taut edges. The laugh he offered came late to its own party. I kept my distance, the way you keep distance from a puddle that might be deeper than it looks. On my way out, I added 2 large bags of staples to my basket and sent them to the kitchen that feeds people who do not rehearse their joy. By the end of the month, the social pictures they loved so much changed flavor. The captions still sparkled, but the settings did not. No trips, no new marble, fewer plates on tables that look better than they taste. Small things, easy to miss unless a person was trained by years of frugal living to read the fine print of life. Another call arrived. This time, she spoke first. Her words were warm like a blanket that someone else had already used. She wanted to know how I was managing the house alone, whether I needed help with groceries, whether I had thought about moving closer to them for support. The air in her voice carried the perfume of planning. I thanked her with careful words and left no hooks where a net could cling. When she paused for an opening, I handed her none. She ended the call with sweetness that stuck to the ear like syrup. I cleaned it off with a walk. News traveled in the way news chooses to travel, through tiny doors. A mutual friend mentioned their renovations had paused. A service subscription had quietly vanished from their living room. The second car never arrived. Sales listings popped up online for items that once starred in their photos. The gloss thinned. The grain showed. None of this gave me joy. It gave me proof. Proof that the lesson had its own legs. People do not fall because someone pushes. They fall because they built on a slope and then danced too close to the edge. I kept my appointment. The lawyer and I signed the last sheets that make judges nod. The trust settled into its shape like concrete drying under a patient sun. The first scholarship receipts came in with scribbled thank you lines that were mostly spelling mistakes and pure gratitude. One of the nurses smiled shyly when a small fund paid for an advanced course she had given up on. She said her nights felt lighter knowing mornings might be different. No plaque. No photo. Just a future with a hinge that now swung. At home, I sorted a small box of old things, the kind of box people forget in closets that taste like dust. I found a drawing my son made when he was 7. A lopsided house, a very tall man, a very small boy, a crooked son. The tall man had the biggest smile, the kind that makes cheeks hurt. I sat with that paper for a while until the ache passed from hot to warm. Then I put it back, not in the trash, not on a wall, just in the box where it could be exactly what it was, a snapshot of a version of us that no longer lived here. The next crack was a loud one. A message arrived late at night. He wrote that things had been tight, that opportunities were coming, that everything would be fine soon, that they were thinking about family, about closeness, about better choices. The words moved like furniture being dragged across a floor, noisy and a little desperate. I replied in the morning with a calm note about taking care of health, about rest, about simple days. I did not feed the fire. I did not offer kindling. I let the cold do its work. The city turned. The season leaned. Leaves crisped at the edges. I bought a new kettle because the old one hissed in a way that sounded like gossip. When I poured the first boil, I thought about how glass looks strong until the first hairline line appears. After that, each small shock expands it. Heat, cold, a careless touch. One day it gives way with a sound that always surprises everyone, even if they were watching. I was not watching to cheer. I was watching to learn. The lesson was simple and sharp. If a person treats love like currency, they spend it until it is gone. Then they stand at the counter and argue with the mirror. The lawyer called to confirm one last appointment, not for me, for a date far ahead, the kind of date that sits on a shelf waiting for dust. Everything was ready. All roads led away from their door. The donations had their schedules. The trust had its spine. The story had its fuse. The cracks in their glass were no longer lines. They looked like a map now. And maps, once drawn, have a way of leading people somewhere they never planned to go. The calendar flipped again, careless and cold. Time doesn't slow down for sorrow, nor does it hurry up for revenge. It moves at its own pace, like an old train that doesn't care who waits at the station. And while the train moved, so did my plan. Quietly, steadily, like water carving rock. Their calls grew more frequent. Not daily, not warm, but steady, the way debt collectors breathe down a neck. Each time, the conversation had the same dance. Small talk about weather, about neighbors, about health. Then the careful lean toward money, never spoken directly, always hidden under blankets of future plans and temporary difficulties. I listened. I answered with short words. I gave them nothing but echoes. The irony kept me company at night. My son, who once thought 10,000 was too much for me to be worth, now sniffed the air for signs of the millions he didn't know existed. He couldn't see that the only inheritance left for him was silence. His wife, sharp-eyed and restless, began to sprinkle sweetness in her words, the kind that drips too quickly and stains the floor. She asked if I'd considered selling my house, moving closer to them, maybe even living together so they could take care of me. Her tone carried honey. Her eyes, I knew, carried knives. I told her I loved my house. She pressed, gently, like a finger testing a bruise. I gave her nothing. Silence roared again. Meanwhile, the city around me thrived with the money they didn't know I had let go. The hospital wrote another note. Children treated, parents relieved, a wing less burdened. The kitchen I supported sent me a letter, shaky handwriting that said simply, "We can feed everyone this week." A young student sent a photo of his scholarship certificate, standing in a room with walls cracked but eyes burning with light. I read these in the quiet of my study, the clock ticking like applause. Revenge wasn't just about punishment anymore. It was about replacement. They had chosen greed over love, so I gave love to strangers who asked for nothing. One evening, I passed their house. Not to knock, not to talk, just to look. The lights inside flickered across perfectly arranged furniture. From the sidewalk, I could hear the faint sound of an argument. His voice sharp, hers sharper. Words about bills, about expenses, about what they deserved and what they didn't have. I didn't linger. I walked on, my footsteps steady, the night air crisp. Their choices were now their cage. The cracks widened. A mutual friend slipped and told me their second vacation of the year had been cancelled. Another whispered about late payments. The social media photos turned fewer, flatter, smaller. Smiles stretched too wide, too forced. Their friends, the ones who liked the glitter, had begun to drift away. People can smell when the shine is fading. My son called again late at night. His voice was tired, not rehearsed this time. He asked if I was proud of him. That was the question he should have asked years ago, not now, not after leaving me with a bill like a scar. I told him I hoped he was proud of himself. Silence followed, heavy, thick, almost alive. Then he said goodnight. I stared at the phone afterward, the weight of his question pressing against the walls of my chest. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of the boy he once was, the boy who drew crooked suns and held my hand in rainstorms. But flickers don't build fires. They fade. The lawyer visited me the following week, bringing a sealed envelope. Inside, copies of the final trust. Everything done. Everything in place. My son and his wife's names absent, scrubbed clean, like chalk wiped from a board. The charities listed, the scholarships named, the hospitals marked. My signature at the bottom, a scar across the page. That night, I poured myself a glass of water and sat by the window. Outside, the cat slept on my porch, its breathing slow, steady. Across the street, a light went out in someone's window. The city exhaled. I thought of the moment they would sit in the lawyer's office. The anticipation in their eyes. The certainty that all my sacrifices, all my years of sweat, would finally deliver them a fortune. And then the silence when the lawyer unfolded the paper and read out the truth. Not a penny. Not a house. Not a car. Only the echo of their own choices. I smiled, not cruelly, but calmly. Revenge wasn't fire. It wasn't noise. It was an echo. You give it nothing but your choices, and it comes back louder than you ever expect. The day came like any other, plain and unannounced. No thunder in the sky, no drums on the street. Just a Tuesday with clouds shaped like nothing in particular. But I knew what was waiting. My lawyer had called earlier, his voice calm, steady, telling me the papers had been read. My son and his wife had finally been shown the truth. I didn't go to the office. That wasn't my stage. My presence would have made it about arguments, tears, questions, excuses. No. My absence made it louder. They would walk in expecting fortune, sit down expecting treasure, lean forward expecting praise. Instead, they'd find lines of text that turned to chains around their ankles. My name at the bottom, not as their provider, but as their verdict. I imagined their faces as the lawyer read. My son blinking, confused at first, then desperate, trying to find a loophole in words that had none. His wife stiffening, her nails digging into the chair, the calculation in her mind short-circuiting when the numbers she expected turned into dust. They would hear about scholarships, hospitals, kitchens, clinics. They would hear about money flowing into hands that never once abandoned me. They would realize their inheritance wasn't marble floors or leather seats, but silence. My silence, sealed into law. Later, my son called. His voice was fractured, no longer polished. He asked me why. Just one word, heavy, dragging. I let him speak, let him choke on his pauses. Then I told him the truth, not with anger, not with fire, but with the calm of someone who has already won. I reminded him of the hospital. Of the bill. of the footsteps fading down the hall. 10,000 had been enough to measure my worth to him. 5 million had been enough to measure his worth to me. He tried to argue, his words stumbling over themselves, excuses falling like broken brick. He said it was a mistake, a misunderstanding, that he had panicked, that his wife had pressured him. But betrayal doesn't come with return policies. Once the crack runs through the glass, it never holds water again. I told him I wished him well. Then I ended the call. I didn't cry. Not that night, not the next. The grief had already been paid, like a debt settled in full. What remained wasn't sadness, but peace. The kind of peace you feel after a storm has wrecked the house and you've swept away the debris, and the floor finally feels clean under your feet. The money began to move in larger streams. A new wing opened at the hospital, painted fresh, children laughing in beds that once groaned under broken springs. The kitchen served extra meals, no one turned away, pots steaming like small suns in the cold. Students walked into classrooms clutching scholarship letters, their futures unfolding like paper boats in rivers that once looked too wide. Nurses studied at new desks, their eyes brighter, their hands steadier. And me? I lived my days simple. Tea in the morning, walks in the afternoon, books at night. The stray cat still slept on my porch, loyal in a way blood never was. The boy with the football had learned to pass, not just kick, his laughter filling the street like music. Life had little gifts, small, ordinary, but real. One evening, I opened the old box again. Inside was the drawing my son had made as a child, a tall man, a small boy, a crooked son. I stared at it for a long time. Then I folded it gently and slipped it back, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with acceptance. The boy in that picture was gone. The man who left me in a hospital was who remained. I could live with that. People talk about revenge as fire, as a blade, as thunder. Mine was none of those. Mine was paper and ink. Signatures and silence. The quiet turning of love into legacy, away from the unworthy and into the hands of strangers who had done nothing but need. That was my revenge. Not loud, not cruel. Precise. Permanent. When the wind passed through my window that night, I whispered to myself. He left me for 10,000, but I left him with nothing. And I left the world with 5 million reasons to remember me. And that, I thought as I turned off the light, was justice. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. That's free and only way to support us. Thank you.